Hi, this is a course on the new way of selling. Everything has changed, everything has moved on and developed. And what I'm going to share with you on this course is the whole psychology of persuasion and influence to allow you to become a better salesperson. My name's Phil Haskell. By way of background, I did a degree in psychology. I was going to become a psychologist, but moved into the commercial world. I was Salesman of the Year at Procter Gamble, and then I set up my own advertising agency. We went from billings of 0 to billings of 48 million, me to 150 people, and I was the salesman. I was the front man, and I'm going to share with you the techniques that worked. The benefits of this course to you are you'll improve your sales skills, you'll improve your relationships with clients, you'll improve your ability to hold a high price, discount less, charge more, and get people to choose what you want them to choose. So in this course, I'm going to share with you some tried and tested techniques. I'm going to share with you how to handle all objections, such as it's expensive and I want to think about it. I'm going to share with you how to increase your average order value, how to develop a relationship with a client in the long term so they want to recommend you. I'm going to share with you why win-win doesn't work and what to do about it, how negotiation works. And I'm going to share with you not only questions that will help you in your sales journey, help you with your sales skills, but also I'm going to share with you some special words that really make a difference. It's ram-packed with information and I hope you're going to enjoy it. So if you're in sales, if you're in account management, if you have clients, frankly, this program's for you. It's for all manner of people, all age of people who want to improve the way they develop their relationships with clients on a commercial basis. So thank you. I'm absolutely convinced that if you do what I say to do in this easy to understand course, you'll improve your sales skills. So join up now. Hope to see you on the course. So in this first lecture, I want to share with you the single most important sales question there is, full stop. Let me tell you a story. I used to work in advertising. We were pitching for an account, a large firm of opticians. They're based in Birmingham. We're based in Leeds, 2.5 hours drive away. He's got 3 Birmingham agencies pitching. He's got a London agency pitching. We're on the outside track. So what is the compelling emotional reason? Because people buy for their reasons and not yours. So at the brief, I went through the normal procedure of going through the brief, and eventually there comes a moment in the meeting where somebody says, okay, so. Either the salesperson says, okay, so, and he summarizes, she summarizes the point, or the buyer says, okay, so, and then we agree we're going to get back to you and so on. And I call it the Columbo moment. Shakespeare was right. We're all just actors on a stage. And I wait for the Columbo moment. I've actually already asked the #1 killer question for salespeople, but then I ask the killer question at this moment in the office in Birmingham. I said to the marketing director, can I ask you one more question? This is after the meeting is over. So for sure, yeah, I said, what is the most important thing to you about the service at the agency, whoever it is going to provide? And he said, can I tell you the honest truth? And I said, for sure. He said, I live in Wetherby. Wetherby, 5 miles from Leeds. I said, really? Yeah. He said, I have to commute. What, every day? No, he says, you can't commute every day. He said, I travel down on a Sunday night and I go back again on Friday. And I said, what is the most frustrating thing for you? This is question number 2. What is the most frustrating thing for you? What is the worst thing for you about the fact that you commute? He said, I hate Sunday nights. I said, why is that? He said, because it infects my day. He said, I arrive home late Friday, I'm busy Saturday and Sunday, I'm just thinking about the journey again. My life is running away with me. So I said, how about, Stefan? At the presentation in Birmingham, I say to you and your colleagues that I insist on a Monday morning meeting at the agency at 9 o'clock every Monday. And the reason I'll do that is because we can have creative there, we can have production there, we can have PR there, we can have everybody we need can be at the meeting. We'll look at the sales figures for the previous week and we'll plan for the next week. That way you'll be in your own bed on a Sunday night. That, he said, would be manna from heaven. And the others never had a chance. And we won that account simply because I found the compelling emotional reason. We won that account and he spent millions with us every year for 10 years. And so the most important thing before we start this program is to get into the mindset of the question. The #1 sales question is, what is the most important thing to you about the service that we'll provide? What is the worst thing about what you're currently being provided with? And always say, why is that? This is the very start, the very heart of the sales process. The key to selling is finding out what's important to the other person. And the second key, which is what we're going to cover in this lecture, is the client's expectations. Often, we're presenting our case and presenting our product or our service, and actually it doesn't meet the expectations of the client. Or the client might have a less expectation. So you're presenting something that's expensive when actually something much cheaper would do. Or of course, vice versa. Now, given that the reputation that you have is the experience that people have of you minus what they expected of you, it leads us naturally into the next great killer question for salespeople. It leads us into the next great sales question for all salespeople. And the question is this: what are your expectations exactly? And the word exactly is important because what we want to know is precisely and specifically what the expectations of the client are. We can talk about delivery times, we can talk about guarantees, we can talk about the number of colours, whatever it might be, whatever aspect of service that you're covering, whatever the nature of the product that you're selling, we need to know what their expectations are of what you are offering. How long it will last, how much it will cost, how quickly you can deliver, and so on. So what are your expectations exactly? And then you build into questions after this question. So what are your expectations exactly? Well, my expectations are, whatever they say, you say, oh, when you say, what do you mean by that? Oh, can you clarify what you mean by that exactly? So that we get precisely what the client wants. And then we itemize all these things and we make a specific point of writing down everything. And then you say, okay, is there any more? In other words, have we covered all of the area we need to cover? So I can meet all your expectations, because that leads us then into the next vital question, which we're going to cover in the next lecture. The University of Chicago did this research recently. A very simple piece of research. It was actually students walking around the campus with a clipboard and saying to other students, we're doing a social quiz on Saturday, a pub quiz, and we're a bit concerned that the questions might be too easy. If they're too easy, everybody gets them right, not much of a quiz. Or they might be too difficult. If nobody gets the questions right, it's not much of a quiz. So I wonder if you could help me. I've got 5 random questions here, and if you'll take part in this little survey just to help us on this, as a thank you, you can either have a chocolate bar or the answers. And 80% of people say, I'll have the chocolate bar. Okay, so here are the questions. So then they ask them 5 random questions. What's the capital of France? What's the population of Bulgaria to within 5 million? Who won the Rugby World Cup on 2 consecutive occasions? And so on. 5 random questions. And then they say, okay, thanks very much for taking part. Now, do you want the chocolate bar or do you want the answers? Now, 90% of people want the answers. Why is this? Because you've piqued their curiosity. And sales should be like this. What we want is the client more and more interested in exactly what it is that you've got to offer. So here's a fail-safe way of ensuring that you improve your sales ability and you close the sale without sounding like a salesman. You always say, can I ask you 3 questions? 3 is psychologically significant. If you ask 17 questions, it's a questionnaire. If you ask 1 question, it's just a question. Can I ask you 3 questions? And the client wants to know what the questions are. Question number 1 is, what is the most important thing to you about the service that you require, and so on. And you build other questions into question number 1. Question number 2 is, what are your expectations exactly? And as we mentioned earlier, you then say, well, what do you mean by that? In other words, you ask more questions within question number 2. If anybody ever says to you, you said there were 3 questions and I've already had about 8, just say, I'm sorry, I got excited. No one will ever say to you, your problem is you're too interested. So here's question number 3. See, I would say, working with salespeople all over the world, the biggest single reason why salespeople aren't as successful as they might be is because they're frightened of rejection. Nobody likes rejection. So question number 3 is always a hypothetical question. You can't get rejection to a hypothetical question. Now, what you've done in questions 1 and 2 is you've covered all the things that are important and their expectations. So question number 3 is not a script. Question number 3 is hypothetical. So, hypothetically, if I were able to do all those things that are important, and you itemize them, and you know you can do them, if I were able to meet your expectations, and you're not saying you can, but you know you can, would there be anything else we need to consider? And you can't get a rejection to that, because they'll say, well, yes, we still need to discuss the guarantee. We still need to discuss the details of the price. In which case, fine, we can discuss this, but you haven't got a rejection. Or they say, no, there's nothing else to discuss. In that case, shall we go ahead? That's the ultimate close. ABC, always be closing. No, that's wrong. Just say, what is the most important thing to you about? What are your expectations? If I were able to do that, is there anything else? No, there isn't. Okay, shall we go ahead? In other words, will you marry me? I've always wanted one of these. I've always liked the brand Mont Blanc, and in particular, the large fountain pen. And an occasion came to pass, I couldn't bring myself to spend this amount of money, hundreds of pounds on a fountain pen, but an occasion came to pass where I actually won a bet with my wife. And the bet was that she would buy me a Mont Blanc pen. So we went along to the local shop, there are no sells Mont Blanc. And I said to the man, Peter Jesper, I said, I'd like to try that pen, please. The Mont Blanc, the one I've always wanted. I didn't say that. And he said, certainly, sir, would you like to try it? Well, yes, of course. So I take the top off and I dipped it in ink and it's all scratching. It's scratching on the paper. All these years I've wanted this Mont Blanc. It doesn't seem to write terribly well. So he said, would you like to try the Waterman, which is a fraction of the money? Well, for sure, yeah. So I try the Waterman pen and it's like silk. It's a beautiful pen, but I want the Mont Blanc because we buy everything emotionally. You see, it would be easy to say, yes, but I can understand you're buying a pen or a watch, it's an emotional decision. Perhaps even a car can be an emotional decision. But all of the decisions that we make when clients are buying from you, there's logic and there's emotion. Usually in business to business, it starts logically. We need a new machine or whatever it might be. But then it becomes emotional. And then we justify it logically. And so it is with this pen. So I said, can I try this one again? He said, yeah, sure. And it's obviously scratching. I am looking at him for help. And it would be easy, wouldn't it now, if you're the salesperson, in this case Peter Jesper, to come up with a solution to the problem. But good salespeople don't think like that. What good salespeople do is ask a question and think about other people. And he said, a lot of our clients, and I become a client now, which I kind of like, a lot of our clients find it scratches a little at first. Oh, that's what's happening to me. I'm normal. He said, it's simply because the ink is dry and it just takes a little time before we get used to it. Ah, right, okay, so we got chatting and we formed the cabal that we need to form in order to sell. That he's not selling something to me. He's not turning features into benefits. He's helping me to buy something. So he said, what are you going to use the Mont Blanc for? I said, I don't know. I mean, I'm not going to stir my tea with it, but I don't have a specific need. He said, a lot of our clients use the Mont Blanc as what they call their contract pen. You look like the sort of gentleman who might sign big contracts. It makes me feel important. So eventually, I buy the pen. There's no negotiation because I'm emotionally tied in. And then he makes reference, you can buy the black leather pouch too. And the process was actually easy. Not because he turned features into benefits, but he tapped into my emotional need. And he asked me questions. What is it you're going to use the pen for? Why do you like the particular pen? What's the history behind it? Have you thought of others? In other words, all the time, what he was doing is trying to establish what my emotional need is. Because we all buy emotionally and justify logically. So let's look now then at a sales situation that's gone wrong and begin to look at objections. In fact, this is a scenario where it wasn't an objection. The salesperson saw it as that. I had occasion in April to chat with an independent financial advisor. When I sold my interest in the advertising agency, I owned a quarter of the building, and that 25% of the building went into my pension pot for the period of time up until last April. It was always going to come to an end, and that's fine. I got a pot of money. It's north of £1 million, but we'll call it £1 million for some easy maths. So I've got an independent financial advisor who I'd used in several investments, and I wanted him to look after my pension. So we met for breakfast and we did the exchange of ritual and cliche. And this is a meeting he should have been looking forward to. He probably was, because this is a decent account for him. So I said, first of all, Lee, tell me, what does it cost for me to hand over my pension to you? What's the cost of servicing this? And he said 3% upfront and then 1% a year. I said, okay, and what do I get for the 3%? And he said, well, I've got overheads. I said, well, I'm sure you have, Lee, but that's not an answer to the question I asked. What do I get for the 3%? He said, it's negotiable. He did that. It's negotiable. I said, that's an interesting answer, Lee, but it's still not an answer to the question I asked. What do I get for the 3%? He said, I'll do it for 2%. Now, where's the trust in this relationship? I think what he sees as me asking questions that are objections. I'm actually not objecting to anything. I'm just asking him to justify the price. And eventually I then said, this 1%, Lee, does it start now, this April, or does it start next year and then 1% a year? He said, it depends. Well, what does it depend on? And suddenly, from a sales situation where actually I wanted to use him, I no longer now want to use him. Because if you're going to reduce your price that quickly, and if you can't justify your price, and this 1%, it sounds to me like you'll take 1% this year if you can, how can I have faith in you? How can I trust? And the irony is, it wasn't actually an objection. What he should have done when I said, well, how much do you charge, Lee, to look after my pension? He should have said, can I ask you 3 questions? What's the most important thing to you about your pension? What are your expectations exactly? And if I were able to do those 2 things, would there be anything else? And then use a magic word. And the magic word I want to use is given. So whenever from this day forward, in business to business in particular, and you're selling a service, always say, well, given your needs, and given we need to, and given what we need to look at is, our fee will be. Because the word given makes it sound like it's a bespoke service just for you. Given. No downside in saying it, big upside, and don't see every conversation as an objection.